Thank you for watching this video from the Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue at Carleton University. This event is sponsored by the Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue, CETD, and the Faculty of Public Affairs Research Month at Carleton University. CETD receives funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The views expressed in this video are solely those of the presenter and do not reflect the views of the CETD, SSHRC, or Carleton University.
Well, thanks, Ruben. First, on the record, not all of what I'm going to say does necessarily reflect the EES. The EES, what's that? That's the European External Action Service, which is the foreign service of the European Union. That is actually my employer, and that's whom I'm working for. What I want to do together with Alan from the Canadian mission in Brussels is to give you a practitioner's view a little bit on how we are dealing with crisis management. I'm going to do a kind of introduction again to the framework for crisis management that we have in the EU and the framework that we have for working together with Canada. And Alan will then complement that with the more concrete examples of where we are standing. So that's the rough idea of how the two of us are going to split this here. This is going to be a little bit more general from my point of view than what Markus has just rightly pointed out in relations with Russia. But let me start perhaps in recalling the EU crisis management framework, which is composed legally of two domains. One Markus has already mentioned, the common foreign and security policy. In Euro lingo, that is CFSP. And part of that is CSDP, the Common Security and Defense Policy. And being a lawyer as well, there are too many of those around today, I guess, but my professor basically advised us in the first round, the first year, saying, ein Blick ins Gesetz erleichtert die Rechtsfindung. Loosely translated would mean, look it up in the textbook, stupid. And that's what I'm going to do. Don't worry, I'm not going to read you the whole book. But I will want to quote some essential articles from the Treaty on European Union that is the legal groundwork for what we are talking about and which gives us the mandate and sets the limits of what we can do in a way. So first of all, on the common foreign security policy, the important element there, I would quote from Article 24, it says, the Union's competence in matters of common foreign and security policy shall cover all areas of foreign policy and all questions relating to the Union's security, including the progressive framing of a common defense policy that might lead to a common defense. The latter one, that might lead to a, is obviously a long-term goal. We are not there yet, but it's important to keep that in mind. And a little bit more concretely, we can read in Article 42, paragraph 2, what the common security and defense policy is. There it says, common security and defense policy shall include the progressive framing of a common union defense policy. This will lead to a common defense when the European Council, acting unanimously, so decides. Pretty important element for the future, for the long-term future, that here we don't need treaty change, but with a decision by the European Council, that is the heads of state and government, one can move forward to an even closer form of integration. But what I also want to quote is 43, which will now tell you what exactly is what we can do. And it says, the Union may use civilian and military means and shall include joint disarmament operations, humanitarian and rescue tasks, military advice, assistance tasks, conflict prevention and peacekeeping tasks, tasks of combat forces in crisis management, including peacemaking and post-conflict stabilization. That is a mouthful. I agree. But it also shows that it is a very wide range of possibilities that the Union has a mandate for, and it is one that allows us to deploy what we call the comprehensive approach, something that in Canada is normally known as the whole of government approach to crisis. That's the legal framework. How is that backed up institutionally and organizational? The institutional one is that we have the European External Action Service, as I mentioned, the guys that I'm working for, which is headed by the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Defense Security Policy. That is Ms. Mogherini at the moment. That title, again, is a mouthful, and it's actually even longer because you should include the Vice President of the Commission with it. Originally, when the debates and discussions on the treaty changes were being done, it was proposed that this position would be called the European Foreign Minister. And that was already in texts that were signed by all the member states at that time, but it was the constitutional treaty that didn't enter into force. So for Lisbon, there were some compromises necessary, and this nice and clear title of European Foreign Minister was then scrapped for the much longer one, but essentially it's what all foreign ministers do. Ms. Mogherini will most likely be here in Ottawa at the end of April, attending obviously bilateral meetings with her counterparts, the foreign minister and the defense minister, but also the public event that we're going to have on CSDP, on the common security and defense policy, and I would encourage you to watch our website for the invites, and if you're interested in more details in the matter, please come forward and register for that one. Organizationally, framework, the European External Action Service has directorates, as every good bureaucracy. We have one for crisis management and planning. We have one for civilian planning and conduct capability, which is the ones guys doing the overall planning, and then you have the more to the operational side of it. We have the European Union's military staff, composed of staff officers from the member states, and we have also the EU Military Committee. Those of you who are familiar with NATO structures might see some similarities in that. The EU Military Committee, like the NATO Military Committee, are advising the political leadership of the European Union on all kinds of military decisions and affairs. We also have in place permanently standing forces that are not European forces, but they are composed of member states' contributions. Battle groups since 2007. They are meant for rapid response deployment, are of a battalion size roughly, and have a deployability for an initial 30-day period. Hesitation. Why? Because these battle groups, even though they are operational since 2007, have not been used. And why haven't they been used yet? Well, that's a political question that I cannot answer directly. We would have to ask the member states, who would have to take the decisions on that one. The political framework for crisis management of the European Union has, as a currently valid document, the EU security strategy from 2003. That was obviously more than a decade ago. And at that time, the challenges in the international and global climate were different from the ones that we are faced with today. So the European Council, the heads of state and government, have given the task to the High Representative to do a kind of an update. But it's in the elaboration of that, it has evolved into an endeavor that is going to be much further than just updating the 2003 document. We are now working on an EU global strategy, and that one is going to be in a final version being presented to the heads of state and government still during this year, and then hopefully also being adopted. So we had the legal framework, the institutional organizational one, the political framework, and then just on the operational side, briefly mentioned, out of all this, we have since 2003 conducted about 30 civilian missions and military operations. And currently we have seven military operations going and 10 civilian ones. They're ranging from naval operations at the Horn of Africa, fighting piracy there, or in the Mediterranean, Operation Sophia against human traffickers, via training missions in Mali or also in Ukraine, and have currently a total of 6,000 personnel deployed around the world. Again, we can come to that closer, but all these, as I say, civilian missions, military operations are meant to create not only bringing back a stable, well, not ending fighting in certain crises, but also in the aftermath to that, to try at least to come forward with a solid political framework and good governance, and allowing countries that have gone through civil unrest to come back into good governance shape. Second point, more briefly, EU-Canada cooperation framework. We are strategic partners, as we call it, between Canada and the European Union. The European Union only has 10 strategic partners, and they are also of different quality, I must clearly state. Canada is one of the highlights, if you like, because we are a community of values and have the same traditions and look alike very much on the global issues, and try to work together and do that even more closely than others. But among these 10 strategic partners are also China and Russia. And they are obviously in a different pot. Nevertheless, and Markus has also related to that fact, Russia is not something that's going to go away. So there is a strategic reason also to work together with Russia. That doesn't mean that this cooperation is something that necessarily is uncritical. Quite to the contrary, you have seen that on the Ukraine crisis, which is actually also called a Russia crisis, if you like. We have had very close and very stringent sanctions in place that are targeting Russian entities, Russian individuals, and are trying is an expression of the fact that we see the aggression against Ukraine and the illegal annexation of Crimea as something that cannot mean that we do business as usual with Russia for the foreseeable future. As I said, Canada is completely more sunny ways, right? Not only since pretty recently, but it's a much sunnier relationship. We have negotiated and initialed a strategic partnership agreement, which is going to set the framework for a wide range of things, including closer cooperation and crisis management. I could quote there again, I don't, for the sake of brevity. And one of the elements that we would like to investigate even further with Canada is that the government in place has made a very, very clear pitch for multilateral diplomacy and cooperation, in particular with the United Nations. And I just wanted to mention that the EU and the United Nations have a very long-term cooperation in it. Will be only one more, Ruben, in place. And that is something where we see a potential that we will hopefully be able to exploit even further. So that could, in the long term, go to trilateral cooperation, EU, Canada, United Nations. Where do we have to start on this kind of cooperation in practical terms? I will leave that to Alan, who can give you an update on where we stand, and I hope that was not too long then. Thank you very much.
Actually,